All right. Hello, welcome to our first Idea Cafe for projects. An Idea Cafe is a type of conversation where each participant takes up to 5 minutes to answer the question, and then we have an open dialogue for the remainder of the time. So, Adriel, I'll leave it up to you. Do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
I can start, sure.
Question is, what do you need in order to be able to trust?
All right. So I guess a bit of context to what I'm coming at this conversation for, because it doesn't explicitly say that, is I'm taking this from the context of what do you need to trust, like a project, an organization, like a group of people or a project, basically, not just an individual. Although I guess a lot of the same stuff will still apply. In the previous, I guess, thinking I've done on trust, to me, it's split into two main high-level groups, and then there's sort of sub parts to each of them. So to me, trust is split into character and competence. So if you trust someone's character, right, that like most people can hopefully trust the character of their family, their friends, the kind of person, they say, I trust that person to watch my stuff. You're saying like, I trust them not to try to steal stuff and, be weird. And then there's the competence part where that is, like if you think about, I don't know, some sort of an action or a war movie, if you trust somebody to watch your back, you're not just trusting their character, you're also trusting their competence, that they're going to be competent and able to actually do the thing that they say they're going to be doing. So in an organization, I think that still applies, where there's the character of the organization. Like, for example, we've seen many cases over the last, let's say, over 100 years, where being profit motivated can sometimes not be great for, the actual actions taken that affect someone's character. And just anything else that would make you not trust. And I think when people talk about trust, character is the most common thing that people are actually referring to. And then for competence, that is like, for example, if you want to be able to trust in a tech company, right, whether that's Google or Apple or just a startup, there is sort of the assumption that like, hey, we're going to, you can trust us with whatever data is on the platform. There's the trust that that company itself isn't going to do something weird, which is character. And then there's the trust in their ability or their competence to, have computer security, not get breached, not get hacked. And that's more a competence thing, where even if the company is well-meaning and you trust the person not to do something intentionally, if they're not competent, then they might end up, bad things might still happen, regardless if you can trust their character or not. So that's sort of where I come at. The thought of trusting an organization is split into those two areas. And yeah, so I think that's sort of an important first thought. And then for the character of a organization, that's where I don't think being, a for-profit company is necessarily like means, you can't be trusted character-wise, but I think a lot of the actions that actually come out of that, right? Like taking actions that are not as ethical, whether that's, blatant polluting or using slave labor or something like that. I think those are some obvious examples of where I would have less trust in an organization. The more things I find out about them doing that, in some cases, they might not have a choice. Like from what I understand, the supply chain for lithium is all based on slave labor. So if you want to be able to offer something with a battery, what do you do? And then competence, that's harder to figure out. A lot of it is based on what the company is saying they'll actually do, which I guess is kind of the third part of trust, is what are they saying that you can trust them to do? And then you would base that out, if you should trust them or not on their character and competence. And so the competence of an organization, a lot of that comes down to what they say they're going to do. Like if a company isn't a tech company, you might not need to trust their tech credentials and their, whatever sort of security protocols they have in place. But if it's something like Google or Facebook, even if security isn't the main concern, that does end up becoming at least, partially involved, because if Facebook or Google or somebody like that gets breached, that can be a pretty serious thing.
Sounds like you're done. I'll do mine. I really liked what you said about breaking into character and competency. I would like to add a third C, which is what you were talking about near the end, which is consistency. That how like they can be really good at something, but if they show up one time and be good at it and it's not good continually, then that's going to be a problem in an organization.
Right.
For me, though, what I mainly trust in an organization, and very few have it, if any, is transparency. Is to honor that, you know what, we live in a very antitrust society. Everyone who we did trust in, it has let us down consistently. And so to be able to create within that current atmosphere, you have to be willing to be transparent. And the beauty is that when some people in any industry start being transparent, they're going to be able to somewhat force the rest of their industry to become transparent, because no information is bad information. So I'm looking for the data on a company, and can we trust it? Who has funded the company? Who are the main players, and do they have the character and competency? I actually care somewhat less about competency. I care that the thing can do it, but I can see how a team comes together to create that competency. So I don't care about an individual's competency, but because of the world we live in, where trust is bought and somewhat both like assumed, and it's assumed that nobody trusts anybody. Nobody actually trusts an organization, and those with the most money who can do the marketing can kind of offset that trust. And so what I look for is, like I said, the transparency in the organization, that you have the information available, but in the current system, although once someone in the industry is willing to put that information out there, the other ones, someone have to follow suit. If that infrastructure isn't in place, then actually it costs you something to be transparent, right? If you are a better lithium mine and you aren't using slave labor, but you're, paying people $2 a day, well, that's better than what's going on. But if you're the one saying, hey, I'm paying people $2 a day, you look worse than everyone else who's not saying anything.
Right.
And so I look for truth, I look for consistency, and I look for verification. How much can I know that this is the case? In a world where we don't trust each other, I trust people a lot. If I'm trusting an individual, it's like, have we met each other in person or on video? And do I get a good feeling from you? And that's not really something you can put into a metric, but also I'm going to assume trust until you've broken it, within caveats, right? I'm probably not going to lend you money. I'm probably not going to go out of my way to spend all my spoons to help you, but I will trust that what you say, I'll take it at face value. I will assume you're showing up honestly until you've proven it wrong. And then even then I'll let you repair it. But if you have the consistency of the broken part, the consistency of breaking your word, the consistency of telling me you're competent in something and then not being competent. Like, I care less about competency and more about honesty and competency, which I don't think a lot of people are capable of. They don't even know whether they're competent or not in something.
Right.
People either overestimate or underestimate themselves.
Sorry, when you say honesty and competency, you mean like they're able to be honest in where they are and are not competent?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that they can say, like, I do not trust anyone like Trump, who's like, I'm good at everything, when
Right.
It shows the metrics don't show that. And I've even gotten to the point where even if you show up at face value and tell me you're the best at everything, you might actually be, and I'm not going to trust you. Like, I need to know that where you're shitty and where you're good in order to be able to trust that you know where you're good. And so that is my trust.
Okay. That reminds me of, I think, one of the comments in the comment chain for this post on Facebook, where they were talking about kind of something like that, where like they don't trust someone if they've only ever said positive things. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple like that, to me, resonates highly in like how different countries show up internationally, where a lot of countries, like, I mean, a lot of the Western countries get in trouble for doing things, but they also admit to it. Like, there's tons of things in Canada and the US and the UK where they've gone on paper and said like, yeah, we messed up, that was wrong. Sometimes they fight it, right? They'll say like, no, we didn't do that until there's proof, and then, oh, okay, yeah. But even just the fact that you can be disproven with proof, and they're on the record as sometimes being like, okay, yeah, we screwed up, we shouldn't have done that. There's certain countries that, especially the West, doesn't tend to get along with. I've never heard them say that they did that single thing wrong. Even when like there's video proof, the entire international community is in an uproar, and they're just like, nope, we didn't do it. You're all just, you know, trying to gang up on us, or it's all fake, and time after time after time, I've never seen them take responsibility for anything. That's when I'm like, oh, okay, I don't trust that not that country. I don't trust that government.
Sorry, keep talking. I just need to text Dad.
Okay. There's something else that you were talking about, right? With the transparency part. Yeah, I think that's super important. I think you can't really assess either competence or character without some level of transparency. But then, like, if we use something from the Game A world, which is like as a part of my day job, I end up reviewing a lot of different, you know, business software. And one of the things that I personally take as like a big tick as a plus is if a company's actually willing to put their pricing on their website. But a lot of companies don't, because there's actually a disadvantage to being, you know, the first one or the only one doing that, because then your price is out there and all of your competitors can be like, look at their price, right? And they can structure conversations and their pricing and everything around just trying to be better in that one-on-one conversation.
Yeah.
And so there is that both, where you hinted on it. If you're the only one saying, right, like, oh, we pay our lithium miners $2 an hour, $2 a day, even if that's better than the others, if you're the only one that's owning up to it, that then gets iffy, where like all the, you know, there's a good chance in that case, the other companies would just stay silent and sort of sink into the background and just wait for the public to tear that company apart. What? You only pay them $2 a day? Yeah, but we're also the best at it. Like that's the best outcome. We're just being honest about it. But the public typically doesn't take that kind of context.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, like, we're having this conversation about the projects, the meta projects. That's why it's during our normal board meeting time. Is how do we build that trust with each other? That's somewhat the easy part, right? To be able to come, clearly I trust you, you're my brother, but like within like, even, you know, I trust Bentley, I trust
Right.
Jonas, even though I've never met them in person, because they show up consistently and but like how do I trust an organization that I've never met the person? Because you can't meet everyone's CEO, you can't meet everyone. And so it's like, right, transparency. And so that's where like the base needs to create that, right? If the world is like, listen, we are not going to stand for not having transparency, and we're going to assume bad, and like we're going to assume you're the worst in the industry if you're not willing to be transparent.
Right.
And there's like right now under Game A, the world is very structured in the people with the money and the people with the power have all the power. Whereas the truth is the people have the power.
Right.
And so creating a system, because the reason they don't want that information out there is they want our money. They want us to not be paying attention to that. And so as soon as it's easy to pay attention to that, and it's easy to see who the best lithium mines are, even if they're still atrocious, then to see that and be like, okay, we need to have another option.
Right.
Seems to not be the case. Who are the people who own these lithium mines? Who are the governments in charge of these countries, and why is this happening? But the first step, or there's probably a few steps before it, but is to have a platform of trust, right? A platform that is like, instead of marketing, how do we know what you actually stand for? What is your mission? What is your vision? What is your values? And are you actually doing them? And what are you doing in the process? Are you adding positive externalities, negative externalities? Probably not zero. Probably not net zero. But
and probably both. Both positive and
absolutely.
And then you know, allowing people, because the other weird thing to comprehend is that like not everyone cares about slavery. A lot of people are completely fine with, yeah, a kid made my t-shirt, that's fine, it was cheap.
Yeah.
And then they'll freak out over animal testing. You're like, that I don't get it, but I don't get to understand everything everyone does. If you just have to sort of try to make a system to handle those. And I think that's where that kind of goes back to the transparency, but a kind of transparency where it's not, I guess, like unilateral, sort of like the previous utopia conversation. It can't be around one single kind. Like, oh, here's the transparency around slavery. Well, great, but what about the environment and slave labor and this and that and all these other things that, you know, people might care about and we might just want to be able to measure, and that's, you know, put out into the world. Here's all of the companies that mine lithium. Here's the companies that use those, and here's sort of the different things, right? Because how would you weigh the two if there's two different companies, one that relies heavily on slave labor, but actually, is the best as far as environmental impact goes, and then the company that actually pays their people is just atrocious in the environmental. That's where I think it gets murky at best.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the irony of course, is usually companies that are good at one are good at the other ones. If you're good at social justice, you're generally more care about the environment and those things, but not always. And even if you are those things and you put that into your business, even if you're Game A, you then still have to market in a world where nobody else is doing that and spend all of that money just to everyone's like, how well, we're not going to trust you. Why would we trust you?
Yeah.
That you say you're green, that you say you're good with.
If you aren't able to be like, if there aren't the systems in place to be that transparent, all I see is that your price might be higher. And they're like, oh, well, you're ripping it off. No, this is a better quality product made with ethical, things all in the way. You don't usually get the option to do that. Like to, have that conversation. It's just, you get to look, people will look at your packaging, your price, and then make a choice. And if there isn't that system where you can like either some sort of a scoring system or some sort of an alert being like, hey, you told us that you don't like animal testing. This thing of the three things you're looking at, those two do animal testing. Just a heads up.
Yeah, exactly. And to help people find their tools, what they need to do that. Because that is, I mean, everything has a trade-off. And even a lot of the amazing solutions out there, I don't actually know how they compare. I don't know how one food system compares to another food system, and not even in the ethics and trust division, but just because even if I could totally trust that every person is in it for the collective good, which clearly I can't, that's probably the opposite of that. But even if that's the case, it doesn't mean your idea is better than the next person who's with that same thing. Your competency isn't necessarily there, right? So having, and that's where I actually really like the broken down of like character and competency and consistency of like, is the product consistent? How long does it last for, right? How much does it cost in actual resources to implement, in labor, in material, in water, in energy, and how long does it last for? And what are the ongoing inputs? And what am we getting out of it? And what is the production, right? If it's creating electricity or creating information, how good is that information? How trustworthy is that information? And for me, like, I trust the crowd more than I trust the government, for sure. Like, it's like, I'm okay leaving up, and maybe it might be wrong, in which case we need to put new things in place, but to say, you know what, I don't really understand chemistry as much as other people. I don't really understand physics as much as other people. So if instead of the pharmaceutical company telling me their thing is safe and effective, if instead I have chemists say, no, listen, like, to the best of our knowledge, this is what this thing does in your body, and we've looked into it and we're monitoring it ongoing.
Right.
Then I can you know what I mean? It's not about trusting the pharmaceutical company. The pharmaceutical company can even still make the thing, but like, what's actually in it is part. It's like, what's everything I don't trust about it? Basically everything. Your profit motive, or your history, your character, your competency, and your consistency. All of it is a problem. And your transparency. But collectively, we can input transparency that then helps us see the competency and the character and the consistency, right? What are all those lawsuits that have been settled or not settled that you've had in pharmaceutical company, right? Like, if we're able to put our data into the system as a person who takes, pharmaceuticals, and then events happen, are they related to the pharmaceutical? Who knows? But if we're all taking bifenton and all, like, statistical significant number of us have heart attacks, we should look into that.
Right.
Like, we're going blind? Weird. What is the reason?
Yeah.
Right. And like,
how many people? A single person went blind? Okay, maybe it's not. 1,000 people went blind? Okay. Good to know.
And to be able to see that like, there's a certain amount of transparency, is probably the wrong word, but information that only comes through the collective, right? Like, even if, again, a pharmaceutical company was working in the greater good, which they're not, then they're not going to have the data they need, because they need to look at it they can only look at it for so many people. They can make it safe enough before it's at market. It has a reason it's there. It's supposed to be helping people. So then it's, makes that bar, and then let's have continual monitoring that isn't about vilifying the company. It's about finding the truth, right? Is this drug, and then, yes, did you know it was toxic if it shows that it's toxic? But if you didn't know and you put in the due diligence and you weren't hiding things and now it turns out, hey, it makes people go blind.
I think that's totally an important distinction, is which then, like, if you didn't know it was, then that's a hit against your competence, not a hit against your character. And I think you're completely right that character is more important than competence. Because if you're competent and don't have character, you're a supervillain. If you have character and you're not competent, like, you're trying your best, but at least you're not going to intentionally kill people.
Yeah. I don't know why, but like the Elizabeth, is it Holmes? Is coming up. She like did that. Like, she didn't have competency and she didn't have character at the same time. I think she kind of did have character. Like, I think she was in it for a good reason. And then it's like, this is the problem with incentives when it's for profit and when it's for your shareholders, is there's every incentive to lie, even when, like, you can trick yourself into thinking you're doing it for the greater good.
Her character there, because my understanding is, like, she knew it was all BS.
Yeah, but I mean, like, when she first started it, the idea was it was always 6 months out, right? It was like, oh, we're getting there, we're almost there. So instead, we're gonna we're gonna say we're there, and then test the blood, and then get it. It's like, I think she had
my
this
understanding is
like
they said we have it now, and like they
she totally lied about that.
And like, oh yeah, give us your blood, and then they would like take them somewhere else and do it. Yeah, it was
absolutely. It was a complete shit show. But I think when she first got involved in creating the company, and that was like, she had a persona that was trustworthy, even though she had a tech background, or not even really, not a science background. And so she dropped out of like school as a scientist to go and do this thing. And that works for tech. It does not work for science.
Right.
Your competency has to be like, I don't think you have to be under the establishment for science, but you better have been a scientist for 10 years. You better have had the scientific discussions, understand what's possible and what's not, what is scientific theory.
I totally, like, whether it's chemists, engineers, doctors, or certain people, you're like, I want you to have gone to school. But you know what, even if you were a chemist, or like you're doing chemistry work and you've got 10 years of like showing that you know what you're talking about, even if you don't have a degree, personally, I'm less inclined. Certain things, like for doctors and engineers, I'm like, no, I still want you to have gone to school. But certain things, I'm like, if you can do the science and you can show it, and you're consistently right, like, and you prove that you're more competent or as competent as other people who did, meh.
I think that's where it's coming up for me in trust, is like, there's this certain amount of trust that as a collective we have in certain organizations. And like, I'm thinking specifically of our medical system, right? That like, oh, doctors are trustworthy. And I don't think they're not trustworthy. But as a collective, I'm like, you don't have anywhere near the information I need you to have in order for me to be able to trust you. Your competency, right? I can trust your character mostly, that you're in it for the greater good, right? You're in it you would rather me be healed than not healed.
Right.
But your competency is like zero because you don't know my body and you don't have all of this scientific information sitting in your head, being able to like, connect with everything else. Nobody does. So unless you're like a genius, and even then you're not going to be my GP, right? Like, that's not going to be the level you're at. And then consistency, it's like between them, they're not consistent. It's like, okay, well, which shouldn't matter because I should be able to get a second opinion. But when each one says I'm your God, right? Like how dare you not trust me? I'm 100%
correct. Like, look how many doctors now get angry if you Google something.
Exactly. And it's like, well, if Google knows. And the problem is that then I look like the problem because I don't trust doctors, right? Because as a society, we hold them at this high esteem. It's like, no, because they don't have the information I need them to have, nor do our politicians, nor do anyone. And so my competency, I'm very honest in my competency, but my competency looks low because I admit that I'm not an expert in everything.
Right.
And yet I know how to save the world. Like, it's like, I also am like for other people, those things don't mesh together. And I'm like, if I could show up like Trump and pretend I knew the answer to everything, then you would trust me more, but you should trust me less.
Right.
And it's like, and so I'm just
like when you say you know something and then you're proven by experts in that field that no, you don't know that thing.
Yeah.
Then in the early days where Trump was saying, I'm the best at the military in this, and then sent some Navy SEALs off and people got killed and stuff like that. And he was like, and various people on his side were like, sorry, he's new at this. Didn't you just say he was the best? I think a really important example now is news. And that's like something where Trump hit a nerve in the public eye, where he started talking about fake news. He didn't create that. Everyone thought that. That was something that was under the surface waiting, where no one trusted any news source. There's this trust vacuum. And I think people are really uncomfortable being in a trust vacuum. So they end up picking, well, which of the available options is the least offensive to me? And then they pick that and just go all in. And that's where you see people completely ignoring when their news source is blatantly lying. And that's on all sides.
Yeah. Yeah. And so to be able to, again, from the foundation, be able to say conversations like this, what can we trust? And then how do we get that information? And a lot of it already exists. And this is where a lot of the trust that we have, because we don't trust things, is built in under law, right? Like that you have to have ingredients on food and beauty products, and only certain ingredients though, right? Certain ones are like fragrance. What the F is that? Is it like a flower? Is it toxic? Like, what is that?
No, there's fragrance and perfume. Thanks, ingredient list.
It's like, this is having that information that's already available to us in a database, so it can be correlated, so that it's like, okay, well, I know fragrance is possibly carcinogenic because you haven't been transparent with that ingredient. And here's everything that's listed under fragrance. So you get the worst mark if you're not giving the actual ingredient. And proprietariness only goes so far when you're going to be costed, when it's going to cost you all of your customers to not be transparent, to be like, do I want to smell good? Do I want to get cancer and not be able to have children so I can smell good? Maybe, if you live in ignorance. But probably not if there's other options available. And so, like, both, I think for society, starting to create the tools that organize transparency that's already there under the law. And then from there, just like, I mean, the politics, right? Which I'm sure you're dealing with the election. A lot of the information is legally there, right? Yep. Like every lawsuit, whether you're a CEO or a CFO, it's just not organized. It's not available. It's not. And then even if someone does organize it, how are they then trusted? Right. And so it's like, okay, we need to be able to figure those things out, because that's a very simple, if not easy, step towards trust for all of us and the interconnection. And then having, like, a lot of the stuff that would come out of to get us to trust one another is also Black Mirror level shit, right? Like what's happening in China with the social currency.
Yeah.
I in no way want that instilled by either my government or Facebook or Google. No, thank you. But at the same time, I want to know if I can trust you. I want to know, and I want on different levels to know. I want to know, can I trust you with my money? Can I trust you with my time? Can I trust you with my, like, whatever it happens to be? Are you, and
yeah, that's what's interesting is it's like, I only like the idea of social credit if it is only at the top layer. Like if you want to participate in a public conversation and have us trust you, great. You need to have your social credit be public to say what you did and didn't do and all that stuff. And then the average person, if they aren't trying to get involved, then, they aren't asking for an above normal amount of trust, then yeah, no, they're fine. They should be as anonymous as they want to stay. But like, for example, one of the things I'm going to have to deal with if WikiElection takes off is then that counts to me too, because I'm a part of a product that's, asking to be trusted. I'm going to end up with a profile on WikiElection too, with the history of saying, can you trust Adriel?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, but part of it is also like, there's a cost that comes to that, right? And again, I don't want it to be our governments, and I don't want it to be Facebook and Google, but I do want to have the conversation with 10,000 people. Like, how do we trust each other, and how do we trust the 10,000th and one person, right? So including, I'm not going to give you my bank account information, right? Like, that's not going to happen. But how do you know that? And so part of it might be something like, well, if we're exchanging money, it doesn't start with $1 million. It starts with 50. And then I have to know if you paid it back. You're not a bad person because you didn't pay it back. You're just not responsible with money. Yeah. And I'm not going to trust you.
Either lack character or competence.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I'm sure you wanted to pay it back, but you didn't. And that didn't, inconsistency. Maybe it's one-off time that you didn't pay it back for some reason. Yeah. And so to be able to be honest about that and say, well, sorry, I lost my job. I thought I was getting my paycheck. That was my final paycheck. To be able to
right, yeah,
actually have the communication.
You can make mistakes, but I think, and that's where I've been trying to sort of figure out where, what's the third C you added?
Consistency.
Where that fits in. And I don't think it's in the same group as character and competence. I think it was like a separate list of things that you need for both. And on that list are both transparency and consistency.
Yeah, I agree.
Because you can be consistent across your character and you can be consistent across your competence. And, you know, if you're 95% of the way there, okay, you screwed up occasionally, but you're still 95%. That's pretty damn good.
Yeah.
And transparency, well, you can't really know if you don't have that information. So I think it's, in my mind, it's still character and competence. And then we're starting to build a list, which is good, because just splitting it into character and competence isn't terribly useful if you can't go deeper. And I think that step of going deeper is starting to come up with like, how do we judge those things? What do we need? What do they mean? And two very important aspects are transparency and consistency.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that. Like, I think we conflate character and competency a lot, especially in our politicians, right? It's like, oh, he had an extramarital affair. That goes to character, not competency. Yeah. Well, Can he balance a budget?
It goes to character depending on where he stands. If he stands for family values and this and that, you're lying. You're being a hypocrite. You're having an affair while you were changing laws to do that. But if you're like, you know, if Russell Brand runs for office and goes in and he has, you know, some sex scandals, that's not really against his character in my mind, because that's kind of his thing. You're like, yeah, all right, I kind of expected you were, you know, going to do that.
Yeah, it's like kind of going against your brand, because I guess that's it, right? Like that if the character is also like society, like kind of like the doctor thing, that society has a certain level of character. So even if it's within your character and it's completely fine that you're polyamorous, society's not ready for that. Right. And you're going to be looked at as like, that's why people have to fake having family values and fake that they're in a monogamous heterosexual relationship and they go to church every Sunday but don't know how to say the books of the Bible. Like, it's like, this isn't consistent with who you pretend to be. Right. I personally, but they would never get elected, would way rather have someone who's honest. And that's where, like, again, if you're like, oh no, family values and we never do any, it's like, I'm just going to call BS unless proven otherwise. Right. Like, I'm pretty sure that most people aren't that. And unless it's the 50s, and even then they probably weren't. It's like, so prove it. And I don't like, it's less of a importance than I'd rather you be honest, but society's not ready for that. Like, no, I want to know if you're gay. I don't even care. I just want you to be able to be open and honest. And can you run the country? Can you run the city? Can you, you know, do, it's like your competency. But you honestly, and this is part of it, you can't be competent if you have to hide yourself, if you have to hide who you are, and you're putting all of your energy into like putting on this persona of like, oh no, what if I'm caught? What if this? I
think it depends what you're competent in, but yeah, because competence does get to be kind of a blurry line where, like, as weird as it is, being dishonest, you can be very competent in that. And then you're doing great, but that's not a kind of competence that anyone wants. So it's
right. But I'm thinking like the don't ask, don't tell in the military, right? When it was there for the States, and like that cost them something, because like even if they were okay being there, it was like, wait, I have to pretend that this is my friend that I go home to at the end of my tour, not my husband, not my wife.
Right.
Not,
and
like,
constantly
it's like,
scanning your language as you're talking throughout your entire career of like not.
And you're like, well, bullets are flying at you, right? Like, it's like it costs you something. And so to constantly be like, okay, well, how do I live my life and give my best self to the world in whatever way I'm doing that? Well, I have to live in a closet about anything, right? And so if like, and this is what I'm learning, is that you don't actually have to spew all of your truth. But at the same time, if you're hiding it, right? If it's something you really don't want people to know, that is kind of like, because then you're going to be making decisions. That's going to be your incentive to make decisions so that doesn't come to light. And whether it's financial or character or any of it, it's like it costs you and it costs your mission something. It costs your competency just because there's other shit going on, right? That you have to like think about that thing first. And it definitely costs your character.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's interesting. So I think there's a part to character where it's, do your actions betray what you're trying to portray your character as? And then there's things where that doesn't even matter, right? Like Pete Buttigieg was openly gay. So like him being gay, there's no character conflict there. But for some people, that is a character conflict for their personal values. So there's sort of the two, at least two parts to character then. There's how they're portraying themselves, and is there a dishonesty there where, you know, their character doesn't match what they're supposed to be doing. And then there's just the individual person, even if you're completely open and honest. If you're open and honest about something that I find offensive on a character level, that still counts against your character on an individual basis. Because you can totally have somebody who fully trusts someone and somebody who doesn't, and it can just be right. Like people who like Trump and like the Republicans, a lot of them like his character. And then a lot of people who and they both have valid claims because they're like, well, it's just that same aspect of his character, if you like it or not, will depend on if that's a plus or a minus.
Yeah. There's some of the things I'm like, how is this not a negative? But sure. We'll just pretend. Family values.
I think a big part of that also comes into where it fits into the system. Like talking about, okay, if you have to lie in order to be able to get an office, and you have to lie and say, that you're in a monogamous heterosexual relationship, but like that's not really a core part of your message, then that's where it kind of gets a bit, again, murky. Where it's like the person lied, but I didn't really care about that. And they did that so that they could navigate this. And people will do that, they'll come up with their own judgments. And so I guess this whole conversation is just around trying to come up with a map for like, here's things to consider when you're trying to decide if you can trust or not. And my eventual goal is to take some sort of an understanding of like, here's how we think about trust. Here's all the aspects and the ways to judge it. Because I think that's where if you take that out to the public and start having people sort of vote and give feedback, it needs to be as like detailed as possible, so that it's not that conceptual. It's actually no. There's characters, competence. Here's examples. Here's this. Here's that. And you're trying to come up with kind of an exhaustive list of things that could make the list, and is starting to group them.
Yeah. I mean, we know we come at it from different ways. Like I would like to be able to go out to, not the public, I'm not going to go down to the street and be like, what makes you trust people? To be able to have this same conversation on multiple channels and then be able to bring that data together and say, okay, look, because not everyone's going to have put it, of course, into character and competency, because that was how you started this conversation, right? Which really helped frame it. And so it could be framed under that to begin with, and then asking people to have a conversation on that. Or just like trust in general. And then we bring that to the next conversation of like, ooh, we divided it into this. And that kind of really helped. What are other ways people organize the information? Right. And then see which one's the best one. And then like creating the system around that and brainstorming like, okay, how would we even characterize character, right? How would we even characterize competency? Because competency is also a big one where like we're judged based on somewhat our confidence in our skills and our actual skill. And they are not necessarily correlated, right? On the best, in fact, they're
I would personally say not at all, but go ahead.
They're basically negative. Like, it's like if you think you're amazing at something, like the people who are actually genius in something and baby beginners are the two who are like, I'm so awesome at this. And everyone in between that is like, oh, you keep learning what you don't know, right? It's the Kruger, I can't remember the word.
I don't remember either.
There's a name for the phenomenon.
Dunbar effect?
Yeah, Dunbar's the Dunbar number though, so I feel like it's not something Kruger, Dunbar Kruger or something.
Okay.
Something along those lines.
Yeah.
But having like the more skilled you get, the less. And for me, it's like, okay, I know that we're supposed to show up and be confident. We're supposed to be like, oh no, trust me because of this, and put on that air. And I have no desire to do that because I think that then I don't have the energy to put on a persona and mask. I just don't. And so here I am, accept me, and then we'll move forward together, or we won't, right? And we can't move forward, and that's cool. I'm down with that. Like that everyone lies on a job application. Everyone shows up to a first date their best self, and I don't. I'm like, this is me, love me or hate me. But everyone thinks you're showing up as your best self. So then they're like, oh God, if this is you now, what are you going to be like in 6 months?
Our sister is going through, some like trying to raise capital for her business. And what she's learned through reading and just through doing it is that for some reason, it's just known that when you're trying to get funding, business owners will like massively overestimate the value of their business. But when you look at the history of it, women are far less likely to do that. And so then you end up with they don't get as much money for their businesses because they don't overestimate, when the people who are doing it just assume everyone will overestimate. So they're taking that into account. And if you then don't do it, if you're not dishonest and the person thinks you are, then
right, which happens, it's like, I'm proficient in Spanish because I can say 5 words. So then they're like, oh, great, have a conversation with this person. Oh, no. So I think everyone who said they're proficient in Spanish really means they know 5 words. When no, it's like, what is your actual level?
Right.
And this is where, like, we need outside metrics to be like, no, like, yeah, you get hired based on your competency.
The main thing is you can't trust individuals. Because the thing about Trump is I think he actually thinks he's the best. I don't think he's lying.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
And so you can't, I think it's just, you can't trust the person's own feedback, because there's also people who are incredible at something, but because they know, they always see this 5 or 10% of things they don't know. They're like, oh, I'm so stupid. And you're like, no, you still know that topic way better than anyone. So how do you judge those two? I think it has to come down to some way to sort of track over time, put, pen to paper, or more accurately, like chisel to stone, write it publicly, say, I think that this is going to happen. I'm saying this, blah, 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 commit to it. And then over time, we see what happens. And we see, okay, this person is claiming to be competent in chemistry. Here's all the things they've said publicly about chemistry and what ended up happening with those, right?
Which is also, the difference between like the individual and the group. And this is kind of what's part of what came up in the Game Be Admins part is, for me, not for necessarily them, is like, how is it the group or the individual you care about? If we care about moving in my Game B forward, then yes, let's let in the people who are competent at the social part and the intellectual part and all of this. But but how you find those people is hard. And so it's like, if the point is Game B itself, then I get having a more stringent barrier to get in. But having it be the individual, right? Like, this has brought me so much. I want everyone to be able to experience this who wants to experience it. Those are very different barriers, right? Like, one's basically let everyone in until they prove themselves that they can't be here. And the other one's like, no, we need to be very, very strategic in who we let in and who we don't let in.
Right.
And so having that piece of trust is like, right, because what I want is to be able to help everyone find their genius, their purpose, their passion, right? And I want to know when I'm on a project that I am with people who are around my competency, right? Like, I honestly don't want to be on a project with Elon Musk. Like, no, thank you. I want to be on a project with other people who are around, and maybe I would be okay with Elon Musk, right? Like, maybe that is my level. I don't know. But he overestimates himself and I probably underestimate him. You know what I mean? So like, are we? Who knows, right? You wouldn't know until like there's circles of, well, these people, and can we rate each other, right? If we were on a team together and then after the team we rated each other, how much is that accurate? Because we know it's not, right? Women get underestimated, men get overestimated. Same with race and gender and or gender expression, everything, right? So it's like, okay, anything we can actually measure that isn't about the feeling inside, right? Like, well, I think they're competent. I think it's like, no, are they competent? Are they actually? And how do we measure it across gender and race, where it's not about what we think we're perceiving and then is it matching up? Right. But I want both to design my bridge, right, that I have to drive across. I want the best engineers doing that. Right. And so I want to know that I want there to be a metric for competency that is universal throughout all of them, and the best ones get hired for that.
Right.
At the same time, I want anyone, including my kid, to be able to learn engineering and be able to know where they're at and how they can progress and how they find their team of people. And that, like, because in our current Game A, very competitive world, a lot of my issue is you have to fake it till you make it and lie about it, which puts it at a disadvantage to everyone, including society, right? We don't have the best engineers doing bridges because we have the people who say they're the best and come off as the best doing the bridges, which is absolutely not the same thing.
Yeah.
And then the bridge collapsed and it's like,
couldn't afford to go to engineering school, and thus they could have been the world. There's tons of things. I've encountered that a lot in my professional world, where there's like two people. One just knows to the grindstone, doesn't talk a lot, and just does stuff and does great work. There's somebody else who does okay work, but they do one thing and then talk about it for the rest of the week. So everyone knows how great they are at that one thing. You're like, yeah, but they didn't do nearly as good of a job as that person, and you don't even know that person's name.
Yeah. Yes, no, and that's like I encounter people all the time who have a project or a passion, something, and they just are like a dog with a bone with it, right? Like all they can do is talk about it. And I'm also that person. I get that. I get the irony. But like at the same time, it's like, right, but I can find holes in everybody's shit, right? Like, I'm like, okay, that isn't the game changer you think it is because you haven't dealt with all this shit.
Right.
Because I'm that person and I'm a pessimist and I'm a realist and I've poked holes in everything my whole life, I now, with my own project, yes, I'm not going to be impartial, but I'm like, come poke holes in it, okay?
Right.
Like, I'm telling you, there aren't holes. There are holes we will fill together. And so it's the kind of thing of like, it's one, I wish I could be the dog with the bone. I wish I could show up and be like, hey, Elon Musk, come talk to me. Hey, give me funding. Like I'm like, calm it down. You don't have the world changing idea you think you do. But I also don't want to discount their idea because maybe I don't see their vision, right? Like people don't necessarily see mine. But at the same time, I'm like, no, that's not, I don't know if you know economics. Like I'm like basic science or there's something that's broken. Whereas no one's been able to break mine besides just like, I don't think it can be done. Right? Like that feeling piece. And I'm like, I get it. That's true and real. And it's going to be a barrier until it's not. And so it's like moving forward and showcasing it as it's happening. But that trust in it, it's like, well, one, I'm telling you I'm not competent, right? Like it's like, so I'm like both competent and not competent. I'm showing you my character, but because everyone else isn't, right? This whole thing with Kyle Cease, and it's like, everyone later is like, oh yeah, it gave me a bad feeling. And I'm like, not at the time. Why like, come on, you can't in hindsight say these things happen. But at the same time, it's just like we have to figure it out together. We have to figure out what someone's competency actually is and not necessarily like looking at the character traits of a narcissist and the character traits of someone who's autistic are very intertwined. The difference is that like, so you show up and they're like, oh, you only care about yourself. You're narcissistic. It's like, no, actually, like we actually want autistic people doing this shit, doing this work, but they come off like they're, you know what I mean, only in it for themselves. Some of them, not all of them, of course, only in it for themselves. Only in it's like, fuck, those aren't the same. And so people are like, oh, well, that person feels wrong. I'm like, no, they feel autistic and we fucking need them. And that's not the same thing as somebody who consistently shows up, pretends they're the best at everything, which is what narcissists do. And it's like, those are not like, it's like personality traits. When you just get their feeling, they kind of show up the same. In fact, if anything, narcissists, like, so the Kyle Cease thing was like, I took a course and sexual predators are like, he's not one because he doesn't come across as one. I was like, did you take a Disney villain course? Like, that's not in any way the same thing. And I'm not saying he is a sexual predator. Well, he is those
things. That's how the court system works, Julie. People show up and the judge just says, you know, that person vibes wrong, jail.
Yeah, vibes wrong, vibes right. And I'm like, that's not in any, like sociopaths are really great at, I think they're the ones, I always get the two confused. The ones who can show up and they're very charismatic. It's like, that's very different than someone who has zero charisma showing up, but their competency in one area is fucking amazing. And we need their competency in that area, but we're not going to get it because of all of the thing we assume is their character. We assume is their character fault. It's like there's something broken about their character when it couldn't be further from the truth. It's like if they knew how to act in that way, they would. They don't know, but they're like showing up the best they can. Like it's like we're trying.
Yeah, I think one important thing about competence, which is probably implied, but sometimes it's good to be explicit with that kind of things, is that of course there's a bunch of different kinds of competence, and then some are linked. Like you can be competent in science, okay, but now what kind of science? Because if you're competent in science, that's going to give you certain skills, right? Like probably, you know, like being able to have a base level understanding of like a scientific research and report, you know, and spotting issues and the scientific method. But if you're like a really good chemist and someone's talking about like advanced physics, I mean, but you know, that's now, it's still under science, but it's now a different kind of competence within science. And so, you know, if somebody loves to pipe up about physics, but they're terrible at it, but then they go and pipe up about chemistry, that's now a different thing, because maybe they are world-class at chemistry and they just love to dabble in physics, but they're not great at it. But in chemistry, when they pipe up, they're like, oh, they've been right 100% of the time. So now it's being able to dive deeper into the, okay, we're talking about science, so they have some level, but now we're talking about advanced physics, and either that person has never said something in this category, so we don't know, even though, you know, they're a world-class chemist, take it with a grain of salt, because we've, you know, they haven't talked on this topic before, or they talk on it all the time and they're very seldom right. So even though over here you can trust them in science, over here you can't.
Yeah, absolutely. We should probably wrap this conversation up pretty soon. I have another conversation, half an hour, and I've been on a Zoom call for 4 hours this morning. and I have some family stuff to update you on. So it probably should, be on online. Do you have any closing statements you would like to give on trust?
None come to mind. I mean, I'll be hopefully, watching this video, sort of dissecting some of it and coming up with some questions to ask the public, which, I mean, I'm not about to go and ask people in person. When I say public, I'm talking like maybe a couple of questions to the Game B space, and then figuring out what questions I can ask on Reddit, that kind of thing, to start getting feedback from multiple people. But yeah, I have no intention on doing it in person.
This might start to spark a whole new conversation, but like you saying that was also, to me, it's like the opposite of consistency. Like, to me, somebody who starts at a skill and improves rather a lot is very different than somebody who has always been good at that skill, or like the ability to improve on something.
Right.
is because it's like, oh, you're on the trajectory to go. Like, it's like
Right.
where you are now versus where you could be is very different. And just
Yeah.
wanted to,
I think
I don't know.
it's also important to note that we're always seeing the current moment. So if you say someone's always been good, well, they probably weren't. We just didn't see them when they sucked.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's kind of part of it. It's like, oh, well, how do we trust that this person are they on their way up or their way down? Are they on
Right.
their, like, in competency,
Yeah.
right? Are they just plateaued? And that's okay. It's I more want to know for me, right? Like, okay, here's where I've come from. And maybe nobody needs to know, right? Maybe no one needs to know. It's like, okay, I show up and I always come off as almost always come off as anxious. But I'm like, does it matter that I used to be fuck ton more anxious? I don't know. I don't know if it matters, but it does, because it's like, listen, I've tapped into how to get rid of anxiety. And so they would ask someone who's completely calm to be like, oh, how do you do it? I'm like, they don't fucking know. They never had anxiety. But to see where you were and then where you are, right? Like Tony Robbins is big on kind of fake it till you make it, right? Find the person who can do it and then find out what they can do. And I'm like, I honestly don't want to learn running from like the kid in Africa who's been running since they were 2 across the Serengeti, right? Like, I'm like, awesome on them. They're clearly the best. They're the ones who are going to win the gold medal. Abso-friggin-lutely. But I'm not that person. I want to learn from the person who was a couch potato for 40 years and then went on to run a marathon. I don't even need them to win the marathon, right? Like, I want to know from the person who was in the area of lack and then got to mediocre, more so than like was a genius prodigy from day one. I'm like, I just think I have more to learn from the other one.
Yeah.
Even though we need both.
Probably also almost like the area of diminishing returns, where after you learn from that person and you've been running for 3 years and you've capped out there, at some point in that trajectory, you may end up talking to the person from Kenya who's been running their whole life, because they're going to help push you that extra 5 or 10%. But yeah, you can't start there. It's like, hey, I'm just taking an intro to physics course. Let me just dial up Stephen Hawking and see what you have to say. Oh, I didn't understand
the
any
Ouija board. Yes. All right, let's end it here. And thank you, YouTube. We will see you tomorrow on this channel for the solution raising on food at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. All right, bye-bye. Oh, I was going to put leave studio. That's not going to work. I'll just leave you here recording. Bye, YouTube.